A Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook, written by Catherine Stewart. Prologue. Years ago, the world for an 8-year-old boy was measured in scent. The dominant scent of Rorik's world was the warm, clean wool of his mother's cloak, the smell of cedar from the fire in her solar, and the crisp pine of the mountain air that clung to her skin. She was Alpha of the Stoneclaw Pack. A fact he knew like he knew the sky. But to him she was safety itself. An Alpha's greatest strength. "It isn't his claws, my little wolf," she murmured, her strong fingers tracing the lines on his small palm. They sat by the hearth, the great stones of the keep a silent promise of security around them. "It is the pack he holds in here." She pressed his hand to his own chest. "Every single soul. That is a weight. But it is also a power no enemy can ever break. The promise of stone can be shattered." It began with a sound. A single jarring clang from the western alarm bell. Then another. Closer. Shouts from the courtyard. Sharp, panicked. The scent of peace was instantly devoured by something else. The acrid ozone of unknown wolves. The tang of fear. And then blood. His mother was on her feet in an instant. The seamless shift from parent to warrior. She didn't run to the fight. She ran to him. Into the wood press, Redik. "Now," she commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. She shoved him into the narrow space behind the heavy firewood bin, the rough wood scraping his cheek. "Do not move. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me? You are Stoneclaw's son. Be strong now." He saw the fear in her eyes, a reflection of his own, but it was buried beneath a resolve of pure unyielding stone. It was the last thing he would ever see of his mother's love. Through a narrow slit between the logs, his world ended. A flash of silver-gray fur, whisperwind colors. He saw their Alpha, a gaunt wolf, with eyes like chips of ice, corner his mother in the center of her own solar. He watched, frozen, helpless. She fought like the mountain itself, a whirlwind of gray fur and righteous fury, but they were too many. Rorik bit his own hand hard to keep from screaming. The coppery taste of his own blood a sickening reality. He watched her fall. Watched the light leave her eyes. Watched the invaders retreat, as the roar of his father and the pack sentinels finally thundered into the room. Too late. Silence. In the ringing quiet that followed, surrounded by the ruin of his home and the overwhelming scent of his mother's blood, the boy learned the lesson the man would never forget. Love was the break in the wall. Vulnerability was the invitation for the knife. The connection his mother had called their greatest strength had been the very thing that made her a target. When his father finally pulled him from the hiding place, the boy who went into the wood press was gone. In his place stood something else, something hard, something cold. And Rorik, son of Stoneclaw, would never be weak again. The air in the training yard tasted like sweat, steel, and cold mountain stone. It was a taste Rorik preferred. And then he saw the hesitation a flicker in the eyes of a young warrior named Fendel. A split-second pause before lunging at his sparring partner. Rorik moved like smoke. Before the young wolf could blink, Rorik had him on his back. The flat of a practice blade pressed hard against his throat. The silence that followed was heavy. Hesitation as a grave. Rorik's voice was low, a rumble like shifting rock. "It is the last home your enemy will ever build for you. Do you understand?" Fendel nodded, his throat bobbing. "Yes, Alpha." Rorik stood, pulling the young wolf to his feet with a single rough tug. Again. From there, the training grew more intense. He pushed them, his pack, to be what he was, to be strong, to be unfeeling, to be stone. Because stone does not break. Stone does not mourn, stone simply endures. He saw Borin, a massive warrior with ambition in his eyes, slam his opponent to the ground with unnecessary force. A low growl rumbled in Rorik's chest. Borin's strength was undeniable, but his discipline was a question that hung in the air. Was that a challenge, or just arrogance? Moments later, his beta Kale approached. His face was a mask of calm, but his scent carried an edge of excitement. Kale was loyal, solid as the mountain itself, but he still believed in things like hope, a weakness Rorik could not afford. "Alpha," Kale said, his voice quiet but clear over the grunts and clashes. "We have a location." Rorik turned, his full attention locking onto his beta. He didn't need to ask for details. There was only one location that mattered. After all this time, after all the blood spilled between their packs, the Omega. He gave a sharp nod, his mind already shifting from training to the hunt. The transition was seamless. More importantly, it felt right. Vengeance, after all, was its own kind of strength. That night, the War Council convened in the heart of the keep. A massive stone table dominated the room. maps etched into its surface. The air was thick with the scent of burning logs and old grievances. Rubik stood at the head, a predator in his own den. His gaze swept over his senior warriors. Kale, the ever-steady rock-boring whose ambition felt like a physical presence, and Alara, their sharpest scout. "Alara," Rubik began, his voice clipping the air. "Your report." "The outpost is weakly defended." "Alpha," she said, her finger tracing a line on the map. "Almost. Strangely so. Her personal guard is small. It's an easy target." Orin grunted. "Then we smash it. We take the Omega and break their spirit." Rorik's eyes narrowed. "We are not wild dogs, Borean. We are stone. We will be swift, silent, and absolute." He looked at them all. "We strike because they believe we are still licking our wounds from the last skirmish. We take the Omega because she is the last of her direct line, a symbol they cannot afford to lose. Not only that, her capture will demoralize them completely." Deep down he knew the truth was simpler. He wanted to hurt them. He wanted to take something precious from the Whisperwind pack, just as they had taken something precious from him all those years ago. The memory of his mother's face, pale in the moonlight, was a ghost that never left him. "Kale," Rubik said, turning to his beta. "You have concerns." It wasn't a question. Kale met his gaze. "It feels too easy, Alpha. Allure, perhaps. Why would they leave their most prized asset so exposed?" "Because they are arrogant," Rauer countered, his voice flat and final. "They believe the forest will protect them. They believe their old magic makes them untouchable. That's why we will succeed." He placed his hands on the stone table. "They will learn that nothing is untouchable." What followed was the finalization of the plan, every detail sharpened to a killing edge. Rauer gave the commands, his voice a low monotone that left no room for doubt or fear, yet Kale's question lingered in the air, a whisper of unease he refused to acknowledge. As the twin moons cast a silver glow over the forest, the Stoneclaw pack moved. They were shadows and silence, a flowing river of dark fur and deadly intent. The Whisperwind outpost was just as Alara had described. Weak, the scent of pine and damp earth was thick, but underneath it the scent of the Omega was a faint, tantalizing trail. The attack was a blur, a whisper of motion, a storm of controlled fury. Without warning they were on the guards. The fighting was brief, brutal, and efficient. Roderick led the charge, his movements a deadly dance. He felt the familiar thrill of battle, the cold satisfaction of dominance, but even so, a strange unease coiled in his gut. This was not a fight, it was a surrender. Soon after, he burst through the door of the main lodge. And there she was, Uvia. She stood alone in the center of the room, bathed in moonlight pouring through a large window. She wasn't cowering. Her hands were clasped before her, her chin high. Her eyes, the color of twilight amethyst, were wide with fear. Yes, but beneath the fear was a core of something else, something unbreakable. Her scent hit him then, not faint like on the trail, but a wave of wild herbs, ozone after a storm, and something impossibly sweet, like moon-kissed jasmine. It was the scent of his own undoing. Her world tilted. His world tilted. For a moment time stood still. He was supposed to feel triumph, victory, the cold kiss of vengeance. Instead, a jolt raw and electric shot through him. It was a feeling so foreign, so powerful it staggered him. His wolf, the beast he kept on a tight leash of rage and discipline, rose up within him and howled a single soul-shattering word.
"Mate?"
The room seemed to shrink, the sounds of the night fading to a dull roar in his ears. His mission, his vengeance, his carefully constructed wall of stone, it all cracked under the weight of that one impossible truth. Before either could speak, the true battle for Rorik's soul had just begun. Mate. The word was a brand on his soul, a poison. In that moment, Rorik's carefully built world of stone and ice shattered into a million pieces. His body moved on instinct, a brutal shove that sent Vivia stumbling back toward his warriors. He couldn't touch her. To touch her again would be to burn. "Get her in binders," he snarled, his voice a rough-edged thing he barely recognized. "Now." His men scrambled, their eyes wide at their alpha's raw, uncontrolled command. Deep down he knew the truth. This wasn't control. This was panic. Her scent, that impossible blend of wild herbs and midnight jasmine, was everywhere. It was in his lungs, on his skin, in his head. A growl rose in his throat, low and feral. What followed was a blur of frantic activity. He barked orders, his mind racing to find a logical reason for the firestorm in his veins. A trick, he thought. It had to be. The Whisperwind pack was known for their hedge magic, for their curses that could twist a wolf's mind. That's why this felt so wrong, so potent. It was a spell designed to break him from the inside out. It was the only explanation that made sense, because the alternative was unthinkable. Moments later, he turned his back on her, on the sight of her being bound. He couldn't look at her without feeling the crack in his foundation widen into a canyon. Kel, he bit out, not turning around. You have her. Take her back to the keep. Put her in the deepest cell we have. Away from me, his wolf whimpered. Alpha? Kale's voice was laced with confusion. You're not coming with us? I'll secure the perimeter. Rorik lied. The truth was he needed air. He needed to run until his lungs burned, until the only scent he could smell was the cold, clean pine of his own territory. He needed to escape the scent of her. Before he could move, he felt her stare on his back, a physical weight. Her world had tilted, but his had been torn from its axis. He had come here for vengeance, but then, as if fate demanded it, he had found the one thing that could truly destroy him. That night, the air in the dungeon was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the fire raging inside him. The cell was carved from the mountain's heart, a place of ultimate security, and yet, with her inside it, Rorik had never felt more vulnerable. He stormed into the small room, the heavy iron door slamming shut behind him with a deafening boom. Vivia flinched but didn't cry out. She was seated on a stone bench, her wrists bound, her amethyst eyes watching his every move. His goal was simple: break her, prove the connection was a lie. He had to be cruel because any softness was a crack in his armor. You will tell me everything, he began, his voice echoing in the small space. Your pack's movements, their numbers, their plans. She just stared at him, her silence a louder defiance than any scream. As the silence stretched, his control began to fray. He stalked the small cell like a caged beast. Do you think your magic will work on me, witch? This feeling you've put in my head, it means nothing. Her voice when it came was a trembling whisper. I don't know what you're talking about. He slammed his fist against the stone wall beside her head. The impact shuddered through his bones. Liar, he roared. To make things worse, her scent bloomed with a spike of fear, and his wolf rose up, wanting to soothe the very terror he was causing. The contradiction was maddening. He was an alpha. He was a warrior. He was a complete and utter fool. He wanted to ask about her lineage, about the rumors of old magic in her bloodline that could bewitch an alpha, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, all he could think about was the pulse he could see beating in her throat. What followed was a spectacular failure. He got nothing from her. No information. No submission. Just quiet, unbreakable strength that seemed to mock his own inner chaos. With a final frustrated growl, he turned and stormed out of the cell, leaving her in the ringing silence. The truth was, he didn't know what scared her more, the enemy alpha who had captured her, or the mate who was terrified of her. In the quiet that followed his disastrous interrogation, Kale was waiting for him in the torchlit corridor. The look on his beta's face was grim. All traces of earlier excitement were gone, replaced by the heavy weight of command. Rorik, we need to talk, Kale said, his voice low. Not now, Kale, Rorik snapped, still reeling. Now Kale insisted, stepping in front of him. A move few would dare. The prisoners from the raid, they've been questioned, and Ilara's scouts have returned. Despite his inner turmoil, the alpha Neuroic took over. He stilled, listening. What did they find?
Nothing, Kale said, and the single word was like a stone dropping into a deep well. There are no large forces gathering in the Whisperwind territory. No war parties rallying. Their main army. It's not there.
Rorik stared at him. The unease from the capture. Kale's initial warning. It all came rushing back. What are you saying? I'm saying the outpost wasn't just weakly defended. Alpha, it was left open for us. The resistance was a show. Kale's eyes were dark with the terrible truth. She wasn't a prize to be protected. She was a sacrifice. She was the bait. Her world tilted. His world tilted. And just like that, everything changed. The revelation hit Rorik with the force of a physical blow. The fated mate bond was a personal crisis. A war for his soul. But this was a war for his pack's survival, which meant his personal crisis and his pack's survival were now the exact same thing. The Whisperwind pack hadn't just set a trap for his heart. They had set a trap for his entire people, and Vivia, his mate, was the key at the center of it all. He had thought the stakes couldn't get any higher. He was wrong. Without another word, he turned back to the cold iron door of the dungeon. His quest for vengeance was a ghost. His fear of the bond was a luxury he could no longer afford. He had to go back in there, because the woman he was so terrified of was now the only thing that could save them all.
In the quiet that followed his storming exit, the silence roared, her breath caught, ragged in her throat. Her thoughts spun like scattered leaves in a whirlwind. The cell was cold. So cold, carved from the living rock of the mountain. It smelled of damp stone, old iron, and him, a scent of pine and rage that clung to everything. A single high window showed only a sliver of the darkening sky, a cruel taunt of the freedom she had lost. Her body moved on instinct, pulling her knees to her chest. She had to think. The raid, the fight that was barely a fight, and then him, the Alpha, roaring. The moment their eyes locked, something inside her shifted. It wasn't just fear. It was a jolt, a violent spark of recognition that her bones remembered even if her mind could not. Her wolf, the quiet, steady presence that had been her companion since childhood, was now a restless, pacing thing, whining with a confusing mix of terror and longing. It made no sense. He was the enemy, the butcher of her people. So why did her soul answer when he looked at her? No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase the feeling of his hand on her arm, the fire that bloomed beneath her skin. Deep down, she knew the truth. It was the beginning of something terrible, or perhaps something that had begun long ago was finally showing its face. She didn't know what scared her more, the ruthless Alpha who had captured her, or the horrifying, traitorous pull she felt toward him. She was the Omega of the Whisper Wind. She was supposed to be her people's heart, their future, not a prisoner in a cage, trembling because her captor's scent felt too much like home. As if summoned by her thoughts, she heard them. Footsteps, heavy, determined, echoing down the stone corridor. Her heart skipped. His footsteps, and he was coming back. Moments later, it wasn't the Alpha who opened the door, but a grim-faced guard. He set down a wooden bowl of stew and a cup of water without a word, his eyes carefully avoiding hers. The stew was thin, but it was warm. Her stomach growled in protest. "Thank you," she said, her voice small but clear. The guard just grunted, turning to leave. "May I ask your name?" She tried again. He froze, his back to her. Alpha's orders. No talking to the prisoner. And then the door boomed shut, the bolt sliding home with a final metallic clang. So, that was the first rule of this new, cold world. She was not a person. She was the prisoner, an object. Still, she had learned something. The guard's fear was a scent as strong as the Alpha's rage. He was afraid of his leader, which meant Rorik's control over his pack was absolute, built on a foundation of intimidation. Was that true strength, or just tyranny? From there, she watched and she listened. She learned the rhythm of the keep through the sounds that filtered through her door. The changing of the guards, the distant clang of the training yard, the low murmur of voices. Once she heard a name spoken with a mix of respect and resentment. Borin. She filed it away because that was the second rule she learned. Even the strongest walls have cracks. Meanwhile, her own wolf pressed forward in her mind, a constant, restless presence. It urged her toward the door, toward the lingering scent of the Alpha. It was madness. She was a daughter of the Whisper Wind. Her people valued harmony, the quiet strength of the forest, not the brutal dominance of the mountain. Yet her instinct surged, pulling her toward the very wolf who had caged her. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was a curse. That night, as the sliver of sky darkened to indigo, the footsteps returned. Not the guard's rhythmic tread, but a different walk. Slower than before. More controlled, as if the beast was on a tighter leash. And that, she knew, was infinitely more dangerous. The iron door swung open. Rorik filled the space, a mountain of shadow and muscle. The air thickened, charged with a new kind of energy. The wild, out-of-control rage was gone, banked like coals. In its place was a cold, sharp intensity that was far more terrifying. Under the weight of his stare, she felt her pulse race, a frantic drum against her ribs. He didn't stalk this time. He stood just inside the door, his stillness a threat all its own. The space between them burned. "The capture," he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question, it was a statement that demanded a response. It was too easy. Why? Her thoughts spun. I don't know our guards. Your guards were a token gesture," he cut her off. His eyes, molten gold in the torchlight, narrowed. "My scouts have returned. Your pack's army is not where it should be. They are not rallying for a rescue." A cold dread, colder than the stone floor, seeped into her bones. What was he saying? As if he heard her unspoken question, he took a single step closer. With every step he took, the bond pulsed, a phantom ache in her chest. "They left you," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "They used you as bait." Her breath caught. The words made no sense. Her pack, her alpha, they couldn't. It was a lie, a trick to break her. But then she saw his eyes, and deep down she knew the truth. He wasn't lying. He was telling her a truth so terrible he could barely comprehend it himself. "No," her voice trembled. "That's not possible. Tell me what the trap is, Vivia." When her name left his lips, it wasn't a snarl. It was a raw, desperate sound. And just like that, everything changed again. He wasn't her captor asking for secrets. He was a fellow creature caught in the same snare, and she was the only one who might know the way out. But she didn't, and the genuine shock and horror on her face was something his own desperate eyes couldn't fail to see. Between them, something cracked. Not the will of a prisoner, but the certainty of an alpha.
In the quiet that followed their confrontation, Rorik found no peace. He paced the torchlit halls of his keep like a caged wolf, the scent of her jasmine and ozone and fear haunting him. He found himself at the small barred spy hole that looked into her cell. He watched. He expected to see a cunning enemy, a witch plotting her escape. Instead he saw a woman, alone. She was huddled on the stone bench, her arms wrapped around herself, not in defiance but as if trying to hold her own broken pieces together. A chest ached with the feeling he refused to name. It was not pity. Pity was a weakness. Still, the cell was cold, and the ache grew worse. "Kale," he commanded later, his voice a low growl when his beta found him staring into a fire. "Alpha?" "The prisoner. She looks weak. A dead captive is useless. See that she gets a warmer blanket and a proper meal." He had to say it because it was a logical, strategic command. It was a lie. He was doing it because the thought of her shivering in the dark was a shard of ice in his gut. Deep down he knew the truth. He was getting soft. The next day, Boren cornered him outside the war room, his massive frame blocking the corridor. "Alpha," he began, his voice a challenging rumble. "The men are talking better food. Blankets for the enemy. They wonder if your focus is where it should be." With every heartbeat, Eris' anger flared. "My focus is on pack survival, Boren, something you would do well to remember." He shouldered past the larger wolf, leaving the unspoken challenge hanging in the air between them like smoke. What's worse, Boren was right. His focus was fractured. He was torn between his duty to be the unfeeling alpha his pack needed, and the primal, undeniable pull to the omega in his dungeon. He had to end this stalemate. He couldn't break her with force, which meant he had to find another way, a different key for a lock he was beginning to fear he didn't want to open. The iron door groaned open. Vivia flinched on the bench, her amethyst eyes wide and wary. The air thickened. Rorik didn't enter with the same fury as before. Instead, he stopped in the doorway, the space between them burning with unspoken questions. He had no strategy left, only a desperate, terrifying truth. "They are not coming for you," he said, his voice raw. "Gale was right. You are bait, Vivia. My pack, my people, they are the target of a trap you know nothing about." Her breath caught. A small, wounded sound. He saw the genuine horror dawn in her eyes, the shattering of her own world, and in that moment he didn't see an enemy. He saw a fellow soldier betrayed by her commanders. As if pulled by a string, he took a step inside. "I don't believe you're a part of this. I see that now. But they are coming, and my pack, My family, they will die if I don't know how. His voice cracked on the last word, a display of vulnerability that cost him more than any physical blow. He was an alpha begging his captive, his enemy, his mate. The silence roared. For a long moment she just stared at him, her thoughts a whirlwind behind her eyes. Then her voice trembled so quiet he almost missed it. When I was a girl, my grandmother told me stories of the First War. Her gaze was distant. She said the mountain's greatest weakness was never the gate. She looked at him then, her eyes locking with his, a silent communication passing between them. It was the shadow it casts, the old waterways, the tunnels beneath the stone that drink the rain. His heart skipped. The waterways, forgotten for a century. A direct path under their main defenses. That was it, that was the trap. She had just given him a fighting chance. More importantly, she had given it to him. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a choice. And he didn't know what scared him more. Without another word, Rorik turned and stormed from the cell, his mind a whirlwind of new desperate calculations. The waterways. It was brilliant. It was insane. It was so unexpected it had to be true. He burst into the War Council chamber where his senior warriors were debating defensive formations. "Stop," he commanded, his voice booming with alpha authority. The room fell silent. "All of it. It's wrong." He strode to the great stone map, ignoring their stunned expressions. "Pull all sentries from the western wall. I want our strongest fighters moved. Now." Borin stepped forward, his face a mask of disbelief. "Alpha, that's our most vulnerable approach. To abandon it would be suicide." "The attack isn't coming from the west," Rorik snarled, slamming his palm down on the map over a section of the mountain's base. "It's coming from underneath." What followed was chaos. Arguments erupted. Borin openly questioned his sanity. He would risk the entire keep. Our families, on what? A feeling? A dream? Rorik's eyes blazed with golden fire. He met Borin's challenging stare. "On the word of the prisoner," he said, the admission hanging in the air like a death sentence. The shock in the room was a palpable thing. "You would trust a whisper-wind witch over your own counsel?" Borin roared. "I would trust the key that fits the lock," Rorik replied, his voice dangerously low. "My orders stand. You will collapse the entrance to the old waterways. You will reinforce the lower levels, and you will do it now, or you will answer to me." He used his alpha command, a force of will that bent the room to his authority. They scrambled to obey, their movements laced with fear and doubt. But as they left, Rorik stood alone. He had bet everything, his pack, his authority, their very lives, on the cryptic words of his fated enemy, and in doing so he had never felt more isolated. The core question haunted him. Was this act of faith the thing that would save them, or the final weakness that would doom them all? The air in the lower levels of the keep was thick with the dust of ages and the sweat of nervous wolves. It was the scent of forgotten places, of secrets buried in stone. Rorik stood in the oppressive dark, the torchlight casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping claws. His pack worked around him, their movements filled with a reluctant obedience that grated on his soul. He could feel their doubt. It was a poisoned dart in the side of his authority, shot from the bow of Borin's open disapproval. His father's words, spoken in the grief-stricken days after his mother's death, echoed in his mind. "Trust only stone, son. Stone does not lie. Stone does not betray." Yet, here he was, betting the lives of every wolf he was sworn to protect. Not on stone, but on the whisper of an enemy who was his mate. With every heartbeat he felt the bond between them, a thin, humming wire stretched taut across the distance of the keep. It was a lifeline, or a noose. He still wasn't sure, but he was done fighting it. He was done denying it. To be a leader, to be an alpha, to be a protector, it required him to act. "Seal it," he commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "Bring the main tunnel down." Now, the final support beams were knocked away. What followed was a deafening roar as tons of rock and earth collapsed inwards, the mountain groaning in protest. The finality of it was absolute. There was no going back. He had chosen his path, a path paved with the cryptic words of the woman in his dungeon. He had made a leap of faith into the dark, and all he could do now was wait to see if he would land on solid ground, or be dashed on the rocks below. Just as the dust began to settle, a scout scrambled down the passage, his eyes wide, his scent sharp with adrenaline. "Alpha," he panted. "Sounds. From the remaining tunnels. They're here. They're trapped." A fierce, terrible joy ignited in Rorik's chest. She had told him the truth.
From the cold confines of her cell, Vivia heard the mountain groan. It was a deep, shuddering sound that vibrated through the stone floor, a sound of immense power and finality. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He had done it. He had listened to her, the ruthless, broken alpha who had captured her, who had terrified her, had trusted her. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't reconcile the two versions of him in her mind. The monster who slammed his fist against the wall, the desperate male whose voice had cracked when he spoke of his family, the alpha who caged her, the mate whose soul called to hers. In the stillness that followed, a cold grief settled in her bones. The truth was undeniable now. Her pack, her alpha, had left her to die. She was a pawn, a disposable piece in a game she hadn't even known she was playing. The betrayal was a hollow ache in her chest, far worse than the fear of her captivity. Because of that, a new, fragile feeling began to take root in the ruins of her old loyalties. Hope! She felt it clear as day. A tentative warmth spreading through her. He had listened. He had believed her. She thought of her grandmother's strange stories, of the Omegas in their line who could hear the whispers of the earth, who could feel the secrets of the stone. Was that where the knowledge of the waterways had come from? Or was it something else? A gift from the bond that pulsed between them. As if in answer, a new sound reached her. Howls! Not the panicked cries of battle, but the triumphant roaring howls of the Stoneclaw pack. They had won. Which meant he had won. Her wolf stirred within her, not with fear, but with a strange protective purr. It was a feeling so traitorous, so shocking she almost choked on it. Moments later, the cell door groaned open. It was Rarik. He was covered in dust and grime, but he stood tall. His eyes found hers, and the raw fury she was used to was gone. In its place was something she couldn't name, something complex and intense that made her breath catch. He held out a clean wool tunic, and the iron key to her cell.
Victory tasted like dust and relief. The Whisper Wind's elite force was crushed, trapped in the tunnels they thought would be their secret path to glory. Rarik's gamble had paid off, but as he walked through his victorious pack, he saw the cost. He saw it in the wary eyes of his warriors, in the way they celebrated the victory but looked at him with a new unsettling caution. Warren approached him, his face a mask of grudging respect and simmering resentment. "You were lucky, Alpha," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The mountain smiled on you today. But luck runs out." The threat was unspoken but clear. "You got away with it this time." Rorik knew this victory, born from the word of an enemy Omega, had not healed the rift in his pack. It had carved it deeper. That's why his next action had to be a declaration, not of luck but of power. He strode to the dungeons, the triumphant howls of his pack fading behind him. He unlocked Vivia's cell himself. Under the weight of his stare, she rose, her expression a mixture of fear and fragile hope. "You are no longer a prisoner," he stated, his voice rough with an emotion he wouldn't define. He was moving her to his personal quarters, adjacent to his own. It was a statement. She was not a tool. She was not an enemy. She was his. As if pulled by a string, his body moved on instinct. He reached out, his fingers brushing her arm. Fire bloomed beneath her skin, and as he led her from the dungeon, a captured Whisperwind warrior was being dragged past. The wolf's eyes widened with pure hatred when he saw Vivia unbound and at Rorik's side. "Traitor!" the wolf screamed, his voice raw with fury. "Our Alpha will not forget this. He will burn this mountain to the ground to get back what is his. He will unmake you both." In that moment, Rorik realized his victory hadn't ended the war. It had just made it personal. He was no longer fighting a pack, he was fighting an alpha with a vendetta aimed directly at Vivia. At them, a low growl rose in his throat. He pulled her closer to his side, his protective instincts surging. There was no turning back now. For 3 days, a tense quiet had settled over the keep. A false peace. Rorik had spent the time shoring up defenses, drilling his warriors, and trying to ignore the constant humming presence of Vivia in his quarters. He was trying to pretend they had won, but then on the third night the mountain screamed. It wasn't a subtle attack. There was no strategy, no cunning. It was pure, unadulterated rage. The Whisperwind Alpha Malachi had thrown his entire remaining force at the Stoneclaw Keep in a suicidal human wave of fury. Explosions, likely forbidden alchemy, rocked the foundations. The scent of blood and burning pitch filled the air. The mountain was bleeding, and Rorik was at the heart of the hemorrhage. He stood on the battlements shouting orders, his voice raw, Hold the gate. Archers loose. But for every enemy wolf they took down, 2 more seemed to scramble over the walls. It was a tide of silver fur and snarling jaws. His victory in the tunnels felt like a distant, hollow memory. That victory hadn't broken them. It had just made them shatter into 1,000 angry pieces. And now all those pieces were aimed at him. He felt the bond pulse, a sharp spike of Vivia's terror from deep within the keep. His wolf clawed at the inside of his ribs, desperate to go to her to shield her with his own body. But he couldn't. He was an alpha. His place was here, leading the defense. What's worse, he knew why this was happening. It wasn't a war for territory anymore. It was a war for her. Just as he thought they might stabilize the line at the main gate, a warrior scrambled up the stairs, his face pale with dust and horror. "Alpha," he choked out. "The eastern wall, it's been breached. They're pouring in."
Rory's blood ran cold. The eastern wall, the section Baron had been assigned to reinforce. He moved.
A blur of speed and fury. He raced toward the breach, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The fighting in the courtyard was savage, desperate. He saw Boren's warriors fighting, but their line was broken, disorganized. It was clear the reinforcements were inadequate. Was it incompetence, or was it treason? The question was a bitter poison in his mind. Then he saw him. Kale. His beta. His brother in all but blood. He was holding the narrow archway that led to the residential wing, his shield battered, his body a bulwark against a tide of silver fur. He was protecting the path to Rorik's quarters. He was protecting her. "Kale," Rorik roared, fighting to get to him. But the world seemed to move in slow motion. Before he could move, a wave of Whisperwind warriors crashed over his friend. Kale fought like a demon, taking 2 down with him, but he was overwhelmed. He went down on one knee, a silver blade buried deep in his side. The sight was a physical blow. It knocked the air from Rorik's lungs. That's why this was happening. Because he had trusted Vivia. That trust had fueled Borean's resentment. That resentment had led to this weak defense. And that weak defense had just cost him his best friend. The chain of causality was a set of iron links wrapped around his throat. He finally reached Kale's side, cutting down the wolf standing over him. But his friend was already slumping to the ground, his breathing shallow, his eyes fluttering closed. Rorik knelt, his hand hovering over the wound, his mind screaming, and beyond his fallen friend he could hear the fighting getting closer to his chambers, closer to her. The price of his choice was a debt being paid in the blood of those he loved. He was trapped, pinned down beside the bleeding form of his best friend, with enemies surging through the breach he should have prevented. He could hear the chaos escalating down the hall, the sounds of his personal guard being overwhelmed, the splintering of his own door, and then he felt it through the bond. A blinding spike of Vivia's terror, so sharp and pure it almost brought him to his knees. He could smell her fear on the air. He could feel her pulse racing as if it were his own, and he couldn't get to her. He was helpless. In that moment he was no longer the Alpha of Stoneclaw. He was no longer a warrior or a commander. He was 8 years old again, huddled in a wood press, smelling his mother's blood, watching the most important person in his world being destroyed while he did nothing. The past wasn't just a memory, it was a hungry ghost that had finally come to feast on his present. His greatest fear, the core belief that had shaped his entire life, had come true. He had allowed himself to feel, he had allowed himself to form a connection, a bond, and just as he had always known it would, that vulnerability had brought ruin. Love was the invitation for the knife, and now the knife was at the throat of everything he held dear. The core question that had haunted him was finally answered. Yes. The connection that completed his soul was the weakness that had destroyed him. He saw the hulking shadow of the Whisperwind Alpha Malachi pass the archway, stalking toward Vivia. The goal of protecting her, the one thing that had come to matter more than his own life, was now utterly impossible. A roar tore from his throat. It was not a sound of fury or command, it was the sound of a soul being ripped in two. The sound of everything being lost.
The enemy Alpha Malachi stood before her, his scent a foul mix of sweat and cruel triumph. His eyes roamed over her, not as a wolf seeing a mate, but as a collector admiring a prize he had finally won. Her breath caught. Through the chaotic symphony of battle, she felt Rorik's despair slam into her, across the bond. It was a wave of pure, soul-crushing agony, an echo of a boy's scream in a man's heart. That pain, it should have broken her. Instead, a growl rose in her throat. Her pack had used her, her captor was broken. She was all she had left. No, that wasn't true. She had him, and he had her. As Malachi reached for her, a sneer twisting his lips, her instinct surged. Her wolf pressed forward, not with fear, but with ancient, forgotten fury. Her grandmother's words whispered in her memory, a story about that Omega line, not just hearing the whispers of the mountain, but being its voice. Her body moved on instinct. She didn't just scream with her lungs, she screamed with her will, a raw, primal command that shot from her soul and into the very stone around them. What followed was impossible. A jagged piece of rock, from the damaged wall beside her, no bigger than her fist, tore loose. It shot through the air like a launched stone and slammed into the side of Malachi's head. The blow wasn't deadly, but it was shocking, unnatural. He staggered back, his hand flying to his temple, blood welling between his fingers. His eyes were wide with disbelief. For a single precious heartbeat, the fearsome Alpha was stunned into silence. In that moment, she risked a glance across the blood-soaked courtyard. She found Ulrich's eyes. The despair was gone. In its place was a blazing, awestruck light. A fire rekindled, and it was burning for her.
He saw it. He saw her stand against the monster that had haunted his past and present. He saw her fight back not with claws but with a power he didn't understand, a power born from sheer unbreakable will. And just like that, everything changed. The ghost of the helpless boy in the wood press vanished, burned away by the fire he saw in her eyes. She was not his mother. She was not a victim to be mourned. She was not a weakness that had caused his ruin. She was his strength. His despair didn't just fade, it evaporated, replaced by a ferocious, surging tide of awe, of pride, of a love so powerful it threatened to remake him from the inside out. The core question that had tormented him was not just answered, it was obliterated. The bond wasn't a vulnerability. The bond, when embraced, trusting her strength, makes him unbeatable. He rose from beside Kael's still form, his movements no longer heavy with grief, but filled with a new, terrifying purpose. He had been trying to choose between his pack and his mate, a fool's choice. The true path was a simple one he had been too blind to see, to fight with her. A new plan, a final desperate, beautiful plan slammed into his mind. It was reckless. It was insane. It relied entirely on the connection he had once feared. He would not just save her. They would save each other. They would save everyone. He threw his head back and let out a roar. It was not the sound of despair he had uttered moments before. This was the true roar of an alpha. A challenge, a promise, and a command. Stoneclaw. His voice boomed over the battlefield. To me. And in the distance he saw her, his fierce, impossible mate waiting for him. As if summoned by his call, his pack responded. The warriors closest to him, the ones who had seen his despair and now saw his rebirth, rallied. Their own hope, so close to being extinguished, reignited from the spark of his. They formed a wedge, a living battering ram of dark fur and renewed fury, and carved a path through the chaotic battlefield. Shreprak moved at its head, a force of nature reborn. Every enemy that fell before him was just an obstacle between him and his mate. His purpose was singular. Get to Vivia. He reached her side, his body covering hers for a split second. The air between them crackled. There was no time for words. There was no need. He looked into her wild, amethyst eyes, and he saw his own soul reflected there. She looked at him, and he knew she saw the same. In the span of a breath, their new reality settled. He was the mountain's fury. She was its heart. He was the claw. She was the will. Between one breath and the next, they turned as a single, united entity. They faced the enraged and bleeding Malachi, who had recovered from his shock and was now stalking toward them, his eyes promising a painful death. The rest of the battle, the screams, the chaos, it all faded into a muted roar. The world narrowed to the three of them, the center of a storm about to break. Beneath the moonlight, under the weight of his stare, her wolf stirred in tandem with his. She felt it clear as day. A surge of power, of shared strength, flowing through the bond between them. It was a weapon they were only just beginning to understand. Without another word, as if fate demanded it, they moved, not as two wolves but as two halves of a whole. The final confrontation has begun. The battlefield narrowed to a circle of blood-soaked earth. In the center stood three wolves, a monster of vengeance, an alpha of stone, and an omega of spirit. Malachi, the whisper-wind alpha, snarled, his temple bleeding freely. He lunged, not at Rorik but at Vivia. He saw her as the weaker prey. He was wrong. Before he could move, Rorik was there, a blur of dark fur and fury, intercepting the blow. Claws met claws with a sound like shattering rock. The fight was on, but it was not the fight Malachi expected. Rawlik was the shield. He was the storm. He was every inch the brutal warrior, his pack revered, a relentless force of nature. Yet, he no longer fought with the cold, empty rage of his past. Instead, he fought with a fire in his heart, a fire lit by the amethyst eyes of the woman behind him. And she was the will. As Malachi focused on Roarik's brute strength, Vivia reached out with her mind. She didn't throw stones this time. Her instincts surged, and she pushed a wave of pure disorienting emotion at her former alpha, his own arrogance, his own cruelty, his own secret fear of failure. Malachi faltered. His lunge went wide. He stumbled, shaking his head as if to clear away a swarm of angry bees. In that moment, Roarik saw the opening she had created. He was no longer the boy watching his mother fall. He was a mate, fighting alongside his other half. To protect, to defend, to love. This was not weakness. This was the ultimate strength. He moved, not just as an alpha but as her partner. Their bond was a physical thing, a current of energy that allowed them to move in perfect deadly sync without a single word. As if fate demanded it, he lunged as Vivia sent one final crippling wave of despair into Malachi's mind. The enemy alpha roared in confusion and pain, and Rorik's claws found their mark. The fight ended not with a triumphant howl but with a sudden, heavy silence. Malachi fell, and in the quiet that followed, Rorik turned, his chest heaving, his eyes finding Vivia's. The core question of his life was finally answered. She was not his ruin. She was his salvation. The remaining Whisperwind warriors saw their alpha fall, their morale shattered like glass. Some fled into the darkness. Others simply dropped their weapons, their fight extinguished. The battle was over. Ignoring the carnage around him, Rorik went straight to Vivia. His hands still trembling with adrenaline came up to cup her face. He searched her eyes, her skin, for any sign of injury. "Are you hurt?" His voice was a raw, broken thing. She shook her head, her own hands coming up to rest on his blood-spattered forearms. "No, I'm okay." In that moment, with his pack watching, he leaned in and pressed his forehead to hers, a public gesture of intimacy and reverence that spoke louder than any words. After that, his duty as alpha returned. He went to Kale first. The healers were already there, staunching the bleeding. His beta was pale, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. A wave of profound relief washed over Roik. Then he had to face the rest. Borain approached, his face grim, his armor dented. He stopped before Roik, and for a tense moment the future of the pack hung in the balance. But then the big wolf looked past Roik, at Vivia, who was now helping a healer tend to a wounded Stoneclaw warrior. What followed was a slow, deliberate nod. "You are not lucky, Alpha," Borain said, his voice a low rumble of respect. "You were right, she is Stoneclaw strength." It was an apology, an oath of fealty, and an acceptance. The rift in his pack, the one he had feared so deeply, began to heal, because they had all seen the truth. They had seen their Alpha reborn, and they had seen the Omega who had helped save them all. Truth be told, the path ahead would be long, but for the first time it was a path he would not have to walk alone. A week later, the scent of fresh-cut pine and healing herbs had replaced the smell of blood in the keep. The dead had been mourned, the wounded were mending, and a fragile peace had settled over the mountain. Rorik and Vivia stood on the high battlements of the keep, watching the sun rise, its golden light chasing the last of the shadows from the valley below. "My grandmother's stories," Vivia said softly, her voice carried on the cool morning breeze. "I thought they were just tales to help a child sleep, about Omegas who could feel the heart of the mountain." Rorik turned to her, his gaze soft. "They weren't just tales." He reached out, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "That power, it saved us. It saved me." For so long he had seen his emotions, his very soul, as a liability, but Vivia had shown him the truth. His love for her wasn't a weakness. It was the source of a strength he never knew he possessed. And now he had to make it permanent. He had to make it official. "There is one last thing we must do," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "If you will have me, not as a captor, Vivia. Not as an alpha demanding submission, but as a mate, as your other half." Her heart skipped. Tears welled in her amethyst eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. Her soul answered before her lips could. "Yes." In the stillness that followed, as the new sun bathed them in light, he lowered his head. It was not a violent claim of possession, but a reverent, sacred vow. The moment his teeth grazed the delicate skin where her neck met her shoulder, the bond between them erupted. It was a searing, brilliant fire of pure love, of shared souls finally clicking into place. A wave of warmth, of peace, of home washed through them both. He was hers. She was his. And as they stood together, marked and mated, looking out at the dawn of their new life, they were no longer a Stoneclaw Alpha and a Whisperwind Omega. They were just Rorik and Vivia. And for the first time, that was more than enough.
Epilogue. 1 year later, as spring returned to the mountain, the scent of healing had replaced the memory of blood. New stone patched the keep's old scars, and within the courtyard a garden bloomed where rubble had once lain. The sound of children's laughter, a music long absent, now echoed off the walls. From their vantage point on the high battlements, Rorik and Vivia watched it all. He was no longer just stone, and she was no longer just a whisper on the wind. They were the mountain and the forest, intertwined. Rugrick slid his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. The harsh lines of his face had softened over the year. His eyes, once burning with the cold fire of vengeance, now held a steady, quiet warmth, especially when they looked at her. "Curl is doing well with the new trainees," Vivia murmured, her head leaning back against his chest. Below, Rorik's former beta, now fully healed, was patiently showing a small, clumsy pup the proper way to hold a practice sword. "He has a gentler hand than I ever did," Rorik admitted, his voice a low, contented rumble. "And, Borin, I never thought I'd say it, but he has become a fine second. His ambition is finally aimed at the pack, not just at me." Truth be told, the pack was stronger than it had ever been. They were strong because their alpha had finally learned the lesson his mother had tried to teach him all those years ago. Strength wasn't the absence of feeling. It was the power that grew from it. As if she'd heard his thoughts, Vivia reached up and placed her hand over his. Her own power, once a desperate, unknown thing, had settled within her. It was a quiet knowing, a connection to the lifeblood of the mountain itself. She no longer feared it. Instead, she used it to help the healers find the best herbs, to calm the pup's nightmares, to feel the shifting moods of their people. He felt it clear as day, the deep, unshakable peace that now resided where a storm of guilt and anger once raged. It was all because of her. Without another word, he gently turned her to face him. His hand slid from her waist, coming to rest with infinite tenderness on the gentle, firm swell of her belly. Their future. A new life. A new bloodline. Born not of war and betrayal, but of a love that had been forged in it. A child who would carry the strength of the stone and the spirit of the wind. Her heart skipped. Tears of pure joy welled in her amethyst eyes as she leaned into his touch. The moment their eyes locked, the world narrowed to just the two of them. A silent promise passing between them. The war was over. The ghosts were at peace. In the quiet that followed, beneath the warm spring sun, their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Thank you so much for watching this video. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. If you enjoyed what you saw, we've got a whole library of other videos packed with more great content just like this waiting for you on our channel. So why not dive into another one right now? And hey, if you want to make sure you don't miss out on our next upload, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. We'd love to have you join our community and see you in the next video. Thanks again.